Dr. Durley, you've been doing well. I just said to let Tim McDonald know earlier that we were on together this morning. He's going to try and join us. And Reverend Leslie.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for everybody who has joined so far. Again, thank you for taking the afternoon to be with us. My name is Cody Norrid, the Executive Director for Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, and we're so happy to have you. As you join, please introduce yourselves to the panelists and to us and your fellow attendees by dropping in the chat your name and your state and a congregation affiliation if you have one. I wanted to thank you all again for being here, a joint event between Georgia Interfaith Power and Light and National Interfaith Power and Light. Interfaith Power and Light has over 40 state affiliates, mobilizing over 22,000 congregations across the United States. We are a group that is dedicated to mobilizing faith communities and congregations to combat climate change, environmental injustices, and to empower communities to be more resilient. Today, what we are going to go through is some brief opening remarks. We will have a prayer from Reverend Brendolyn Jenkins Bozeman. Then we will dive into a Q&A period with Dr. Durley and the Senator Warnock. And then from there, we will move on to the steps that you all can take to make an impact on federal policy and to make an impact where you are. If you have questions, please add them to the Q&A feature. If you're not familiar with that feature, you can find that in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen next to the chat. You can click on that and you can drop your questions in there. We will be viewing that and pulling those questions into conversation throughout the event. To begin, I want to offer a land acknowledgement. I want to first acknowledge that where I am here in Georgia, as in every other part of the United States, we are on indigenous land. We are on stolen land. Acknowledging that the land we each reside within and depend on is indigenous land is one of the ways that we seek to orient ourselves in this work and do the work of justice in our lives. Today, we honor each tribe, their ancestral land, their presence in North America, and today, our commitment to repair the harm of the present and the past. I will uplift that where I am in Decatur in the Atlanta area, I am on the land of both the Muskogee Creek and the Cherokee tribes. If you do not know where you are, obviously there are people tuning in from all over the nation. I encourage you to do the research that it takes to know whose land you are on, and I invite you to learn. I will drop a link in the chat where you can go to do the research on whose land you are on and begin reconciling with that fact. As many of you know, GIPL and National IPL worked really hard throughout 2020 and 2021 on the Faith, Climate, Justice voter campaign to have faith voters turn out to vote with climate in mind. And it's for that very reason that it is even more important that today we are going to be able to sit down with Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock, and why it's so important to have a faith leader, a moral voice as part of the groups that are making decisions on climate policy. There has always been a place for faith leaders on the forefronts of justice movements, and that is true for Senator Warnock as well. Today, I will introduce you to our speakers very quickly. We have on the line Reverend Brendolyn Jenkins Bozeman, the Executive Director of the Imani Group and also pastor of Hudson Memorial CME in Augusta, Georgia. We have the Right Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley, Chair of National Interfaith Power and Light and Pastor Emeritus of Providence Missionary Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. And joining us shortly will be Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock, the senator from Georgia, and for over 15 years has also been the pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. The senator is currently finishing up some business on the floor and will join us shortly. But before then, Reverend Brendolyn, I would invite you to offer a prayer and a centering for today's conversation.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Cody. And if you would pray with me. The words of our elders, guide me, O thy great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold us by thy powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed us until we want no more. O Lord, our Maker and our Creator, how excellent is your name in all of the earth. And we pray now from the temple of understanding. May there be peace. We come together in prayer for the earth. We gather with one mind, with one heart to ask for help in our time of need. Give us the wisdom to recognize the blessings that we have been given and become true stewards of our earth. Help us to create a flourishing, sustainable life together on our common home. Teach us acts of compassion, wisdom, and humility to create a world which speaks through environmental justice so our children's children will be grateful that we have taken responsibility, oh God, for all forms of injustice here and now. We celebrate the inherent freedom of all people through respect, tolerance, and loving kindness. Help us recognize our ignorance and confusion, that it be dissolved and that we may see with the clear light of our common human ground. May there peace. Help us listen to the age-old, tried and true wisdoms of our indigenous peoples and our ancestors. Oh, I recognize now that the land that I sit on is that formerly owned by the Yamasee. We pray, God, for justice, liberation, and righteousness. We pray for those who intend evil and disenfranchisement from our participation in this system. We pray that empire's attempt will not prevail, that what was meant for evil, somehow you will make it right. Lord, and most dearly, we pray for our father, Elder Warrior, one Gerald Durley. Continue to strengthen his body, his heart, and his mind. Fill that bereaved and mournful place that is still tender for his beloved. We pray for our senator and leader. Strengthen Senator Warnock. Give him guidance and wisdom in the decisions and deliberations. Now and always, we ask these things. I ask in the mighty, majestic, and magnificent name of my Lord and Savior, Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for that, Reverend Brendolyn. We are still waiting on the senator to join us. So as we continue to wait, I wanted to offer a few things that if you are from Georgia, here are some things that you can do to help. Over the next month, the next couple of weeks, we are finishing up 50 days of climate action, Eco-Faith from Home. I'm putting that link in the chat. It is free to register. Just next week on the 4th, we will be sitting down with representatives of the National Sierra Club and National Moms Clean Air Force, as well as Jonathan Laycock-Nisley, who is on this call, who you'll hear from later, to talk about what are all the intricacies of the federal climate policy that's before us, and what are the opportunities for us to support those policies to make the most change that we can in all of our communities, and also figure out how we can leverage our place as faith leaders and people of faith to ensure that those policies are just and actually give our communities the environmental justices that they hope for and that they deserve. I will also note that if you come away from this time today and you're thinking, what else can I do? What else should I be doing in Georgia? I also wanted to take time to highlight Drawdown Georgia. Project Drawdown Georgia, for those of you who might be familiar with the worldwide Drawdown Project, Drawdown Georgia was an effort to sort through 100 high-impact climate solutions for the globe and narrow them down to 20 for Georgia. What are the most high-impact climate solutions for Georgia? And why that's related to our conversation today is that that project highlights several infrastructure pieces that we're going to talk about today. Things like grid modernization, expanding our EV infrastructure, looking at new, clean, affordable energy, and how we can put that into use in our different communities. And I'll also highlight for you that you can visit us at www.gipl.org, and you can get in contact with me and my team to request any educational workshops, including more briefings on local, state, and federal policy issues, and ways to write letters to those people who represent you, to meet with your representatives, your congresspeople, and to let them know that you care about climate, and you care about climate as an extension of what it means to be faithful from your tradition and help shape up those policies, what is in them, and support to get them passed. So again, thank you all so much for being here today and being with us. As we continue to wait on the senator who should be joining us any moment now, Jonathan, if you don't mind, I'll pass it over to you. Hopefully you can give us some framing on today's conversation and some of the infrastructure pieces that have come into play over the last several weeks as we wait for the senator to join us. Thank you, Jonathan.
Sure, thanks, Cody. So I think it's most helpful to think about the present moment we're in by looking to the past a little bit. If we think about 2009, coming out of the Great Recession, then President Obama signed into law a stimulus package. It was kind of small by the standards of what we're looking at now. It was something in the range of $800 billion. And some portion of that was investments in clean energy. There were some tax credits for solar and wind, for electric vehicles, and energy efficiency at home. And that fraction of a stimulus package that really wasn't focused on clean energy or the climate helped launch a clean energy revolution in the US. Investments from that package are what made solar affordable and something that we see on households in every town across the country. It made it so that even conservative states across the country were investing in wind power because it just made economic sense. And it made electric vehicles a common occurrence, something we see every day. And so coming back to the present, President Biden has proposed a $2 trillion infrastructure package with climate front and center. So just think about what we can do if we get that package passed. And I'll highlight, there are 100 exciting pieces to this package, but I'll just highlight a couple of them. We see in this package investments in clean energy to keep that momentum going. And one really exciting piece that has never been proposed, never been implemented before, is a national clean energy standard to get our country to 100% net zero electricity by 2035. We know that clean electricity is of course one of the key ways that we care for our climate, care for creation. It's also one of the key ways we can care for our neighbors, because so many people in all of our communities across the country are needlessly dying each year from pollution caused by fossil fuel energy. So that's a really key promise that President Biden campaigned on, and we now have the chance to put that into law. There's also in this package an expansion of some of those clean energy tax credits I talked about before that were created in 2009. So we can keep that momentum going, keep expanding wind and solar across the country. We've also seen this past year a lot of different times in which our electrical grid was just not up to the challenges that it is now facing. Our electric grid is old, and it's not ready for the climate disruptions that are already happening and will continue to happen. We saw in California, big parts of the grid being shut down preemptively because of the risks of wildfires. We saw in Texas, so many people without power from a winter storm that the state was not ready to handle. So now is the time to invest also in our electric grid, making sure that it's ready for climate disruptions, and also making sure that it's ready for a future where everyone is generating energy at home. We need a grid that's ready for solar panels on every roof, and that's part of what this package will do. Another key piece of course, our country's infrastructure and also what it means to work for environmental justice is clean water for all of our communities. Too many communities still do not have clean water, especially low-income urban areas are still dealing with the scourge of lead pipes. Flint, Michigan has kind of been the poster child for this. Flint still does not have clean water, and there are far too many communities across the country that are facing that same challenge. So this package would invest in removing lead pipes from our water system, ensuring clean water for all of our communities. The final thing I'll highlight is that this package would invest with justice. President Biden promised on the campaign trail last year that 40% of the investments in addressing the climate crisis would go to the communities who have been hurt the most by our current fossil fuel driven economy. And this package, we need to make sure that the legislation will deliver on that. That 40% of these dollars will go to the communities who are disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities who have been hurt the most by pollution from fossil fuels. So this package, you know, there are so many things that I could say about it, but I'll pass it back to Cody to see if he wants to start a conversation on S1 or if that's
great.
Ready.
The senator has just joined us. Senator Warnock, thank you so much for being with us today. It's a real pleasure to have you here. I will hand it off, Reverend Durley, to you, and the time is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Cody, thank you so much in Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. We're so blessed to have such a powerful prayer by Sister Bozeman earlier, Jenkins Bozeman earlier. Welcome, Senator Raphael Warnock, our senator from Georgia. You have made us so proud, and you can see that we're giving you a clap of hand prize on the screen. You have made a major impact so far in your brief time in Washington. We know this today that your time is very limited, so I'm get right to it. First of all, thank you for being our friend. Thank you for what you've always done. You have been an innovator for years in the civil rights movement, and we realize that the civil rights movement now is the environmental movement is the new civil rights movement, and you're at the heart of it. They've been talking about the $2 trillion American Jobs Plan that the president is getting ready to talk about and present and hopefully to get passed. You've been an integral part of that and watching it as it develops. And you've always been concerned about communities of color and those that pollute the least suffer the most. So I just want to give you your latitudinal freedom to go ahead and speak about, Jonathan has outlined the plan and all of its implications. What does this plan really say in a few minutes? But then more importantly, how does it, in your estimation, how does it impact those of us who are in the environmental movement, those of us who are facing the climate crisis? And also speak briefly, the voting aspect is so very important. And I know voter suppression has been on your mind and on our minds. And how do those two things come together? In other words, Senator Warnock, we've got a national audience all over the country. Let us connect the dots for us, how this American Jobs Plan or the infrastructure plan ties into climate change, and then how it impacts communities, the vulnerable communities. And thank you for being with us, our friend.
Well, thank you so very much, Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley. Nobody else like him on God's verdant green earth. Grateful for your leadership in so many ways. As chair of Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, and for many years, the distinguished pastor of the Providence Missionary Baptist Church. So grateful for your leadership and the ways in which your faith has always come alive in your activism on a whole range of issues: civil rights, human rights, climate change, climate justice. And thanks to all of you for being a part of this conversation. Let me just start off by saying that the people of Georgia have given me an incredible and high honor to represent them in the United States Senate. And it's something that, you know, again, I'm very proud of what we achieved in Georgia. We've been working on voting for years. And so what happened in November and then again in January didn't just happen on those 2 dates. It happened as a result of years and years of work and focus. I'm just very, very grateful for what we were able to achieve. Georgia, in a real sense, changed the world, or at least it certainly gave the country a chance. We're proud to elect Joe Biden to the presidency, but we'd be having a very different conversation had Georgians not stood up in the way that they did, exercise their basic constitutional right to vote, sending me and John Ossoff, first Black senator and the first Jewish senator from Georgia, to the United States Senate. And as a result of that, we were able to pass the American Rescue Plan, which literally put shots in people's arms, money in their bank accounts, a shot in the arm of our economy as we claw our way back to thriving. We don't just want to survive, we want to thrive. Many great provisions in that bill, and I won't belabor them, but let me just lift up one, because this is one, when we talk about the environment, what are we talking about? We're talking about our children. So one of the things that we did in that bill was we expanded the earned income tax credit and the child tax credit. We fixed the gap in those two legislative provisions. And prior to that work, in some ways you were better off in terms of what you would get through the earned income tax credit or child tax credit. You were better off making $80,000 than $18,000. In other words, there were families in our country and in our state who were so poor. When you think about that, they were too poor to get the help. And so we expanded it, and the experts tell us that we are cutting, that provision alone will cut child poverty in half in our country. So now we pivot, as you point out, to the American Jobs Plan. This is about infrastructure. And a big part of that work will certainly focus on the need to build a clean energy grid and to provide clean energy jobs. I believe that in order to have an economy that's sustainable, you got to have an ecology that's sustainable. Sustainable economic practices and sustainable ecological practices are not in competition with one another, as some would have us to believe. We're at a moment, a tipping point, as it were, a dangerous one, in fact, that we've got to get serious about the fact that climate change is here, the impact of the choices we've made on us right now as the earth gets hotter and hotter. We keep having these record hot years only to be beaten by yet another year. And so there's a kind of urgency to this work. And for those who say, well, what about the jobs? All the jobs are in an ecologically sustainable future. And so that's what the American Jobs Plan is about, among other things. It's about roads, bridges. It's about updating our infrastructure. It's about rural broadband. When I was campaigning, Dr. Durley, I moved through huge swaths of our state where people didn't have an internet connection. You talk to farmers, they'll tell you can't even farm sufficiently without an internet connection. 10% of our state doesn't even have a broadband connection. And about 38% of our state, think about that, nearly 40% of people in our state have only one choice: to connect to broadband. So we are building infrastructure. We're creating a grid for clean energy jobs. At some point before we leave here, we need to talk about the battery plant that's in Commerce, Georgia. I stood up and did a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that we kept that plant open. And I won't belabor the details right now, but you have a company there, was in a dispute with another Korean company, SK versus LG, and the plant was going to close. We did a lot of work behind the scenes to keep that plant open, save 2,600 Georgia jobs, and put Georgia at the center of the future around battery technology, electric cars, zero emissions that are being produced right now by Volkswagen, and by Ford. So this is work we've got to do. Let me close, and nobody believes a preacher, Reverend Dr. Durley, when he says, let me close, but let me close so we can have some conversation. I know you've got questions for me. Let me close by saying this. You know, all families have, even though the love may be there, hopefully the love is there. All families, as you know, from being a trained licensed counselor, Dr. Durley, that all families have some level of dysfunction. That is, that there's some, the issue is the degree to which all families have some dysfunction. And we're in a moment in the American family, in which there are those who are trying to leverage our historic challenges around race, for example, who are trying to accentuate the differences that we have. They're sowing the seeds of division because they don't have any vision. They're trying to use these fault lines to their own advantage just to hold on to power, while they do the bidding of the oil and gas companies and some of the others that don't want to, that are making it hard for us to push into the future. I often say that infrastructure, our broken infrastructure, is a reflection of the brokenness in our politics. And so here's the thing, we're in this moment in the American family where we've been having these conversations over the last 4 years. At the highest office in the land, somebody was trying to just stir up these differences and difficulties. And we're seeing that play out in the big lie that led to the assault on the United States Capitol, which is then metastasized in this effort, this fight against voting rights in capitals all across the country. We got to address those issues, and I addressed them through the For the People Act. And I want to talk about that, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, but here's the deal. That's the infrastructure of our democracy. We got to address that. But we also have to address infrastructure. What I'm saying to you is that sometimes when the family can't figure their way forward and they've been arguing at each other's throat for a long time, sometimes the best thing you can do is get involved in a project together. Just do something together big that gets you focused on building something. And while you're building it, maybe you can talk through your issues. Maybe you ought to go and paint the garage. Maybe you ought to go and upgrade the bathroom, upgrade the kitchen, paint the fence, finish the basement. What I'm saying is that the way families go to Home Depot every now and then and engage in a home improvement project, the American family could use a home improvement project. We need to get engaged in investing in the spaces that we share together for the sake of our future. And while we're doing that, while we're building based on vision, I think we'll push back against some of the forces of division in our country.
As usual, my friend, you have summarized this, and I know your time is very short because they told us, and I'm being tapped on the shoulder by the director of your committee. But just briefly, and there are other questions that will be asked, and maybe you can't, and we'll have to do it after you're gone. But given what you're battling with there in the Congress, how do you move people who see climate change, environmental justice below economics and all things? Can you connect the dots for us? Because it's all intertwined. But to get the people to the level of understanding, we've got to support the kinds of initiatives that you and the president and others are talking about. What do you say to people about the imperative that we've got to do that now? It is not melting glaciers in the future. It is not polar bears in the future. This is a now urgency here in Georgia and the world.
It is urgent. It is now. It impacts all of us, but it impacts marginalized communities in a disproportionate way. It's the reason why African-American children in urban environments, for example, suffer higher rates of asthma than their white counterparts. And when they have asthma, they're more likely to die. And so for that reason, I have long said to folks who are in the environmental community, which for so long was seen and in some ways was a largely white middle class, upper middle class movement. I've said to that movement over the years, y'all need to be talking more about civil rights and human rights. What you're saying is important.
Thank you.
But you also got to bring the equity question. You got to look at these issues through an equity lens. You got to be talking about civil rights and human rights. By the same token, and you've been doing this work more than almost anybody, Dr. Durley. By the same token, I've said, and you've said to the civil rights and human rights community, you're right about voting rights, you're right about the issue of racism, you're right about all of these issues, but what more fundamental right can there be? What more fundamental human right is there than having clean air to breathe and clean water to drink? Y'all need to be talking more about environmental issues. And so we have to bridge these divides: civil rights, human rights, climate change, environmental issues, environmental justice. And then we have to push hard against this idea that somehow when we address these issues, we've got our heads in the clouds and we're disconnected to the reality of capitalism and the economy and marketplaces. The fact of the matter is the future is clean energy. The future is clean energy jobs. And if we don't invest in that globally, we're going to be at a severe disadvantage, impacting our workers, our companies, and ultimately our economy. Sustainable economy, sustainable ecology.
How can we help you and your cohorts who are there working for the globe, for the environment? Give us some examples how we can help you. You're speaking to a national office here at the Interfaith Power and Light. How can we help you, Senator Warnock?
And
Thank
Senator,
you so much.
I'll just say, I know that you've got to go. You've got some things to take care of today. So I want to thank you for that. I'll let that be your last question. The time is yours here as we finish up and we let you get on to more business. And then everyone will continue this conversation in Q&A afterwards. But Senator, the time is yours.
Well, thank you. Very, very quickly, let me just say, stay engaged in your local community. The work is global, but we have to be engaged locally. You know that. And all of you are doing that. Continue to do it. But even as you engage in your activism around this issue, we do need you involved electorally in our politics. I mean, I'm fighting to push for passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the For the People Act, because here's what some folks are trying to do. They're trying to create an increasing divide between what the electorate wants and who gets to decide. In our country, the people pick the politicians. What are these voter suppression bills are about? They are about democracy in reverse. Rather than the people picking the politicians get to cherry pick their voters. And if the politicians get to cherry pick their voters, they can do the bidding of those who want to get in the way of the future, which is clean energy, clean jobs. All of these issues are connected. And so know that that fight is not only in Georgia, it's in state capitals all across the country. And we need your engagement. We've got to fight for the soul of our democracy and the voices of our people. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, my friend, and thank you
Senator,
so much.
thank you
Very much.
I'm so
Cody,
grateful. Thank you so much.
Cody, we come back to you.
Of course. Well, thank you all again to the Senator and his staff, and thank you all for being with us again today. What we're going to move into now is, what can you do? We heard today from Senator Warnock and Dr. Durley about the opportunities that we have coming up in Congress to advance this vision for building a more just world, advance this vision of a robust infrastructure that includes everyone, and the benefits also are for everyone. Now we're going to share some ways to help you advance those important policies, both around the country and also if you're particularly here in Georgia. You heard earlier from Jonathan Laycock-Nisley, who serves as IPL's Federal Policy Associate in Washington, D.C., where he tracks federal legislation. And you will also be hearing now from Tiffany Hartung, who is IPL's Field Director. She's helping with our Zoom tech today and setting this event up, and also will help out in Q&A when it comes to several of our campaigns that are going on. So Jonathan, I know we pivoted to you earlier, but I will go to you now to see if there's anything else that you want to add after the Senator's remarks. And then we will transition to Tiffany, who will help us talk about how we're working with volunteer leaders and green team leaders across the state to make an impact. So Jonathan, to you.
Thanks, Cody. So I'll just say a couple more words on the For the People Act, S1 in the Senate. Which, of course, the Senator Reverend touched on. But, you know, as he said, of course, this is a climate issue, and it's also a faith issue. At the very heart of so many of our traditions is the value that everyone's voice should be heard, and especially that the voices of the least powerful must be a part of the decision-making process. And we've seen too many places across the country where there's been legislation introduced or passed in the last few months that does just the opposite. As Senator Warnock said, we've seen for decades, and we see increasingly, efforts by politicians to pick their voters rather than the other way around through the gerrymandering process, which is so often used to dilute the power, especially of Black communities. We've seen the ways in which, as the senator was saying, dark money flowing from fossil fuel interests overwhelms the voice of the people, because we know that people overwhelmingly support climate action, but these contributions from fossil fuel interests and others drown out their voices in the legislative conversation. And so the For the People Act would severely limit partisan gerrymandering. It would get dark money out of politics so that we at the very least know who is funding these politicians. And it would set uniform standards across the country for things like early voting and voter IDs, so that we can have a fair, common set of rules to hold our elections. So with that, I'll pass it to Tiffany to talk more about how we can be supporting the passage of both the For the People Act and also the American Jobs Plan.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. So as the conversation, picking up on how the rest of the conversation's gone, with Interfaith Power and Light, as well as Georgia IP Interfaith Power and Light and our state affiliates across the country, have been working to ensure that both faith leaders and volunteer leaders around the country are hearing from that Congress is hearing from people of faith and conscience on both of these issues. So I'm going to offer here a couple of ways that you all can help advance the policy opportunities that have been talked about today. So one, I'm going to drop here in the chat, is you can email your members of Congress and urge them to act now to advance a climate and clean energy infrastructure package. Specifically, the provision, the language, the template email here in the link I've included specifically includes the language that Jonathan has talked about. And then also for those in terms of the For the People Act, this critical bill, if you are, for those of you perhaps not in Georgia, because your Georgians, your senators are champions on this legislation, but for the rest of you around the country, it would be great if you could also email your senators and ask them to tell them urge them to support the For the People Act. And then additionally, in ensuring that our members of Congress are all hearing from people of faith and conscience that these issues are a priority to our communities and that they're critical for our shared values. One of the important things that you can be doing is meeting with your members of Congress. Many of the IPL state affiliates right now are in the process of organizing May lobby meetings with their members of Congress. And so if you have a state affiliate, it'd be great to for you to get involved, reach out to your state affiliate and get involved with your state affiliate. I'm going to drop here in the chat a link. I think many of you are involved with your state affiliates, but if you're not and not familiar where to find your state affiliate, click on this link I just dropped in the chat. Some of you, we don't have state affiliates in all states. So for those of you in an affiliate in a state that finding yourself in a state that doesn't have an affiliate, we invite you to reach out, maybe organize a meeting with your members of Congress for your congregation or your faith community. And we have some resources to help you do that and figure that out. And I've just dropped a link in for a toolkit for organizing a lobby meeting. And then one last thing on meeting with your members of Congress If you are gonna reach out and set up a meeting with your members of Congress, we would love to know about it. I know Jonathan on the Hill, it would be helpful for his tracking. So please fill out this form with the link I just dropped in the chat and let us know, and we can help you in helping provide some resources for that and some support. And then one last thing, I know that was a whole lot of things that you can do. We will email you these after, along with the recording, so you don't have to worry about catching them in the chat. But one last thing that you can do is this week is a national call-in week for climate investment and climate and clean energy investments. So specific to the infrastructure package that we've been talking about. So it would be great if you could encourage your faith community, if you could make a call to your members of Congress, but also encourage your faith community to make a call. We've got a link that I'll drop in the chat as well to a sample script and a phone number that you just put in your zip code, and it will connect you with your members of Congress, and it'll connect you with your senators. And it has a sample script of what you can say when they pick up the phone, so you're not at a loss. So those, we'll make sure that we get those to you in an email as well. And I think those are most of the ways that that we have to share with you. I thank you all for joining and for help. We really need all of us to be keeping the pressure on Congress and encouraging that and ensuring that they're hearing from people of faith on these critical issues. So now I think I'll turn it back to Cody, and I think we might go into Q&A session.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jonathan and Tiffany. And again, everyone, yes, there will be an email that goes out today with all of this information and also recording in this video. So please feel free, if you think there are other people who need to watch this and be educated on this, share it to your social media, tag Interfaith Power and Light and Georgia IPL. Send it around however you want to. That's yours to send around, and we encourage that. I mentioned some ways to get involved with Georgia earlier, so I won't rehash that, but I've dropped my email in the chat. It's codi@gipl.org. If you need anything or you want to get connected with Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, please email me there. I'm happy to respond. Like Tiffany said, we're going to move into some Q&A time. And so I kind of want to start off with, I'll pitch it, Jonathan, to you first. But then everyone, please feel free to chime in. How do we, as people, citizens, encourage representatives and Congress to work together on these important issues? And how can we be most effective, when people are thinking about how they can put pressure on federal decision makers? How can they be most effective and equipped to do that?
Sure, that's a great question. I think we as people of faith are especially well equipped to do some of that bridge building work by appealing to our shared values across faith traditions. We have some of these common kind of foundations for so many of our traditions. We value the divine gift of breath, of life, which is threatened by fossil fuel pollution. We value the divine gift of our earth, our common home, which is threatened by global climate change. And so starting the conversation there on what we know we share with people of every political stripe, I think is a great place to start building those bridges. Our friends in the Quaker Lobby, the Friends National Committee on Legislation, started a bipartisan climate solutions caucus a couple years ago. And they were successful in getting many conservative members of the House to join because it was a faith-based setting, and they felt comfortable having those conversations that they wouldn't be willing to have other places. On what's effective, there's a lot of different research on the different ways that we can reach out to our legislators and the impact that has. There are a whole bunch of different numbers, but one that stood out to me that I saw in some study was that a phone call to an office is worth dozens and dozens of form emails. So if you can pick up the phone and make a call and let your senator or representative know that these issues are important to you, it really doesn't take that many calls from constituents to move the needle and move their perception of what issues are important to you all.
That's great, Jonathan. Thank you for that. Tiffany, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a great response. Definitely lots of it doesn't, the importance of hearing from constituents is not to be undervalued.
Yeah, so just to recap, make a phone call if at all possible to your office of your representative or your senator. And even if you want to go beyond that to be even more effective, I would imagine, try setting up a meeting, meet with a staffer, meet with a representative, meet with a senator to let them know that in your district, you care about these policy issues and you care about climate as a faith leader. Jonathan, this may also be to you, but then I would love for Reverend Dr. Durley to chime in as well. We talked a little bit about this when the senator was here, but for all of these long-term projects, for all of the different climate and environmental justice work that we want to do over the coming years at the federal level and even in state houses around the country, it depends on us not allowing voters to be disenfranchised. It relies on people to be able to use their right to vote to push these things across the line. And I'm wondering, to what extent you're seeing voting rights interlinked with what we hope will happen with this infrastructure package and other packages surely to come over the next year and in the future. And what are the processes in place? What's the realistic opportunities for voting rights legislation to be passed at the national level?
Sure. So maybe I'll start quickly on the infrastructure package. This might be review for some of you, but I think it's helpful because these rules are so strange and a little nonsensical. So we can pass a bold infrastructure plan with a simple majority vote in the Senate through a process called reconciliation, which focuses on the budget and the federal spending. We can fund an infrastructure plan already with the rules that are in place with a simple majority vote. That's not the case with the For the People Act and other voting rights legislation. There's currently the filibuster in the Senate, which requires 60 votes to overcome. And so we have called on the Senate to pass the For the People Act with a simple majority vote. They have the power to say that this legislation is too important to be held up by the antiquated rules that are in place. And they can choose to say that this priority is too important and that we need to pass it today, that it's a moral obligation. So I would encourage you to pass that same message on to your senators. Jonathan,
thank you. And Dr. Durley, if you can unmute, you're still muted, and I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
Yeah, you use the term how to get the people not to feel disenfranchised. I thought it was more important to get the people not to feel discouraged, because when people feel discouraged, they feel hopeless and they don't know exactly what to do. So I think one of our major roles, and I think I look back at what we did during the civil rights movement, I realize that this is a different time, but some kind of way we've got to get our people more involved at the gut level issues. I saw a report the other day that among the people, climate change was number 11 down from the top priority for economic and police justice and all these things. So I think one of the major roles that we've got to do is create within our own people a sense that this is a possibility and that it is now. It impacts us educationally, politically, health-wise, and all of this. So I think one of the key things, Cody and others on the call, is to us move beyond the veil of discouragement. And I think that's what Raphael was trying to say, that they're up there fighting tooth and nail, and we've got to now shore in and shore up as to what it is that we've got to do. And we've talked about it as far as the legislation, but it's interesting when things get so overwhelming, the legislative process against people on the street is kind of lost in that. We've got to connect the dots to show that voting is imperative to changing what it is that the political leaders do. And one of those is, of course, we've got to address the business aspect, big pharma, and those of us who keep this thing moving. And that's where people power is so important. We cannot lose sight of that. Many were discouraged during the during the movement early on. But once we began to see that, once we collectively come together and get out of our silos, we come together. I know this is redundant what I'm saying, and everyone on this call, they're already, as I say, Reverend, convicted and converted. But some kind of way we've got to put that into commitment. What good is to be converted and convinced if we're not converted? And the conversion and the commitment means that now the kinds of things that Jonathan and Tiffany and you and others were talking about is that now in our own individual state levels through Interfaith Power Night or whatever your organization might be, is that the time is right. It is a perfect time. This is the perfect storm right now because we're dealing with health, we're dealing with economics, we're dealing with education, and those are the soul. And Martin Luther King says, we've got to be the soul of America. And I believe the environment is the soul of America now because everything rests within the soul, and the soul is where everything grows from. So we've got to be the soul and the consciousness of America. So that is so critical right now. And I don't mean to be some inspirational speaker right now, but a very pragmatic person who's saying that now, not only the legislative side, but we've got to get in and let our people know through, let me use a colloquial, through hook or crook, what it is that we've got to do, why it's important from asthma to all the other kinds of things. And that's the major role that IPL and other organizations must do now, where the people take charge. Once the people grasp it, the politicians and the business people will follow. Right now, that's that juggernaut that we've got to work through right now, I believe.
Thank you, Dr. Durley. I appreciate that. And that actually leads into another question that I wanted to ask from the chat, which is, it's so disheartening that so many of our brothers and sisters of faith seem uninterested in the truth about climate change, even though it's real and human caused and it hurts our neighbors. How can we get through to them? And to start on that process, I actually thought, Reverend Brendelin, I wonder if you could offer some words about that first, and then perhaps you, Dr. Durley, as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for this opportunity. I did list in the chat one initiative that the Imani Group is involved in, and that is the Black Church, the Green Movement. We realize that the church, and particularly the Black church, is woefully unequipped and uninformed on just the basics of environmental justice and climate change. We're a long way from talking about net metering and carbon trade-offs and all of that, just the basic language of definition. And so this initiative will, over the next year, in a series of 6 workshops, 25 pastors, clergy around the country, will sit in a workshop for that reason. Our inaugural workshop was this past Saturday, and I think that we have the Reverend Michael Malcolm joining us on this now. He was our keynote speaker. And although our attendance was not what we wanted to be, what we did was reach out within 11 congregations that was really nationwide. And so just exponentially that will grow. And so that is one way that we are addressing that in a real tangible way. Thank you for that opportunity to share that, Cody.
Of course. Dr. Durley, do you have anything to add to that?
What was the question again?
The question is, it's so disheartening that so many brothers and sisters of faith seem uninterested in the truth about climate change.
Well, that's not true. That's not true. See, I thought the question, that's a very interesting way that you said that, Cody. Remember this, African Americans are interested, but they used to say this years ago in 1984, why aren't more Black pastors interested in HIV/AIDS? We were interested, but we did not have all the facts. We didn't know. They thought it was a white male gay disease, so we would not know. So many times, as Reverend Bozeman was saying, when we don't know, we can't put it together. But we're interested in climate change. We're interested in education. We're interested in health. So that's a misnomer. But when we don't have all of the facts and the figures, once we get them, we are a people of survival. We're a people that do not live on ignorance, but once we get the information, then we can begin to work along with others to come together. But right now, so it is a strong interest in climate change. When you look at the 85-mile corridor down there in Louisiana, where cancer is running rampant among those 150 energy companies that are polluting. When you look at the asthmatic rate in the cities, we're interested. We see that in our own children. But some kind of way, we've got to understand that we now talk about diversity and inclusion. When you feel somewhat included and you've got other priorities, then people perceive you as not being interested. We not only are interested, we are concerned and we want to get involved. That's why we're talking now to reach over to other groups like IPL and you and the others on the Tiffany's talked about, what Raphael has been talking about for a long time. But so many times the perception is that, well, let us go over here in our community and do this and let them sit and squalor in the inner city urban areas. No, no one wants to live in a confined area with 110-degree temperature all day long and no jobs and poor education and limited access to health care. That's stupidity, that's ignorant. So we are interested, but what we've got to do is open up those new, those avenues of communication. And the communication is predicated upon 3 primary goals. And I think that this is a mutual understanding. First, if I'm to communicate with you, I've got to understand you. I've got to understand you. And for me to understand you, I've got to see that we're different, but I want to know who you are and who you want you to know who I am. Next, I've got to respect you. There's a difference in certain cultural and economic community, but we've got to respect each other. And third is the big one, trust. I've heard people say that Black people are not interested in the vaccine. We're interested in the vaccine. We don't want COVID, but so many times they're missing pieces. So when we communicate and the respect is there, then we come together, and then that's when the overall nation and all Americans can begin to grow. So Cody, there is a strong interest, but we've got to continue, as someone said earlier, continue to put that message that climate change, the mitigation of climate change is no respect of whether you're Black, white, tall, short, gay, whatever you are. It is no respecter of who you are. A wildfire does not say, I think I'll burn up the Paradise in California, I'll burn up Detroit, no. So we're all in this. We either, as Dr. King says, we'll survive together as friends or die together as fools. And that's where we are right now. So that's the kind of thing. So we've got to make a deliberate effort, even through IPL and other organizations, to say, wait, let us look out. That's why these, for each other, these JEDI programs, justice, equality, diversity, and inclusion are so paramount now, because then we all become together as a force. And then guess what? The nation will be much stronger.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Dr. Durley. As we come to the end of our time, I'll just say, for those who are also asking questions about how also to talk to people who deny climate or don't make the connections between their morals and climate, I would also encourage people to think about the effects of climate change and connect it to how it impacts your neighbors. So often we talk about climate change as if it's a very large, far off thing that we can't connect to our communities. But the reality is that communities are facing sea level rise, that wildfires are happening faster, hotter, and in more places. Communities are living around coal plants. They've been experiencing contaminated water. They've been breathing it in and having higher rates of asthma. There are numerous things that are going on in each of our states that we can connect to people, everyday people, our neighbors. And I would say that there's no way to love God and love neighbor without loving creation, because it's so bound up in the ways that it impacts our neighbors. Again, thank you all so much for being here. I hope if you got anything from today, you got that there is work being done and there's a lot of work to do. And the most important thing that you can do is to dig in at where you are. Change starts by building power from the grassroots. That's what we do. And so get involved in your city, in your county, connect with the Interfaith Power and Light in your state, connect with us, and begin pushing climate solutions at the grassroots level and solutions for environmental justice. And also put pressure at the federal level. People like Senator Raphael Warnock, who are putting their time and their sweat and their energy into creating these policies that will produce a clean energy economy, will produce an infrastructure that is truly reflective of the types of change and types of future that we want to see. We need to support them, and then we need to call and put pressure on the people who don't support those priorities so that we can get those things passed. So again, thank you all for coming today. We really appreciate your time. You'll receive an email with all of this information. And remember, there's work being done and there's work to do, and we cannot do it without you. Thank you all, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.